The story begins when we see a priestess registering herself to finally be an official adventurer. The priestess's name was Anna. Suddenly she was approached by a group of young adventurers. The party leader stated that they were assigned to do an urgent task, which is to slay goblins, and they were going to need a priestess for that mission. The lady at the counter warned them that their rank was not sufficient for goblin hunting, but they ignored her. Anna, on the other hand, accepted the party's offer because she didn't want to ignore people in need. During the quest, Anna was skeptical about whether they could handle the goblin all by themselves. So, Anna suggested retreating and preparing a bit more before proceeding. But the members rejected her request. They assured her that everything was fine because goblins are just frail monsters anyway. Not long after that, things started to get awry. The party got separated, and Anna along with the mage were ambushed by a group of goblins. The goblins pressed the mage against the floor. They took her staff and broke it in half. Anna tried to save her, but she failed, resulting in her getting stabbed. The warrior and the fighter came up to save them. While Anna was trying to heal the mage, the rookie warrior bravely fought them to give her time. But in the end, the goblins managed to corner him and end his life in a brutal way. Meanwhile, Anna failed to heal the mage because her wounds were already fatal. Despite being outnumbered, the fighter stood up to fight the goblins, but she was caught off guard when a hobgoblin assaulted her. The fighter got paralyzed by the attack, and with her remaining strength, she asked Anna to escape along with the mage. As Anna tried to escape, an arrow shot hit her from behind, causing her to fall down. But before things get worse, our hero, the Goblin Slayer, comes to save her. He easily took down the group of goblins and gave Anna a potion for healing. After Anna drank the potion, the mage asked Mr. Goblin Slayer to put her out of misery. Mr. Slayer accepted her request. Later on, Mr. Slayer covered Anna and himself with goblin blood to avoid being detected by the goblins. They went back to the place where the warrior and assassin died in action to hunt the hobgoblin. Anna froze from fear after she saw how the warrior was brutally murdered by the goblins. After a while, they found the goblins' hideout. At the hideout, they saw the fighter was being raped by a group of goblins. With Mr. Slayer and Anna's synergy, they took down the goblins and the shaman goblin. They then saw young goblins trembling from fear as they watched their parent goblin being slain. Of course, Mr. Slayer took the young goblins' lives too. Anna broke down in tears. She did not expect that her first quest would be so traumatizing. The next day, Anna went back to the guild. At the guild, she met up with Mr. Goblin Slayer. It looks like Anna and Mr. Slayer formed a party to slay goblins together. Before we proceed to action, we get to see a glimpse of Musum, Mr. Goblin Slayer's childhood friend. At her window, she saw Mr. Slayer, so she invited him to have breakfast with her, to which he accepted. At the dining hall, Mr. Slayer paid his debt to Musum's uncle, and he gladly accepted the payment, but he was still worried about Mr. Slayer's life because he took too many quests. Mr. Slayer appreciated the uncle's concern, but he assured him that nothing bad would happen. Musum then brought up that she would be going to the guild for some deliveries, so she asked Mr. Slayer to go together with her. On the way to the guild, Musum and our hero had a heartful conversation about their lives. Mr. Slayer stated that his dream was still the same, and that was to remove the existence of the goblins. At the same time, inside the guild, a man was begging for the counter lady's help to hold up a quest to save their village. When the man left after giving his payment for the quest, Miss Counter Lady gave a huge sigh because that was the third goblin slaying quest she received, and all of it was underpaid. But as a public servant, she has to help the people in need. When Musum and Mr. Goblin Slayer reached the guild, all eyes were on him. It turns out that he was notorious for accepting goblin slaying quests only. Musum noticed that there was discrimination toward her childhood friend, but she couldn't do anything because she's not an adventurer herself. All of the adventurers' attention was diverted when the counter lady started posting the available quests. Everyone was hyped up on searching for the quest to accept. But that was not the case for Mr. Goblin Slayer because he knew that no one likes goblin slaying quests, so he didn't need to rush. Later, Anna shows up to inform Mr. Slayer that destroying a cave with flammable liquid is going too far. Mr. Slayer rebutted. He stated that using flammable liquid would be more efficient to kill goblins. After most of the adventurers left, Mr. Goblin Slayer and Anna went to the counter for another goblin hunt. Before they headed out, Mr. Slayer asked if there were any rookies who accepted a goblin slaying quest. The counter lady stated that there was, and it was a party of 3 rookies. Hearing that alarmed Anna, she knew how dangerous Goblin was. So without hesitation, she asked Mr. Goblin Slayer to save those rookies. But Mr. Slayer refused that idea because his plan was to go to the mountain castle and destroy one of the goblins' hideouts. They then headed out. While they were on their quest, let's have a short flashback of Mr. Slayer's background. The village he used to live in was invaded by a horde of goblins. He witnessed everything while the goblins were slaying his family and friends. That's why ever since that day he promised himself to bring revenge by removing the existence of goblins. Back to the present, Mr. Goblin Slayer uses a flaming arrow to burn down the hideout. The goblins were confused. They did not know where the attack came from. So, they retreated, but Anna used her new barrier skill at the hideout's exit to prevent the goblin from escaping. As the fire spreads, Anna and Mr. Goblin Slayer watch the goblins slowly being burned by the fire they created. The next morning, a party of 3 which consisted of a high elf, Lizardman, and Dwarf went to the guild to search for none other than Mr. Goblin Slayer. Miss High Elf asked if she could kindly meet the Orc-Balg, but Miss Counter Lady said that there was no adventurer named Orc-Balg. The old dwarf apologized for Miss High Elf's behavior, so he asked the Counter Lady if he could meet up with Mr. Beard Cutter. But Miss Counter Lady never heard of him either. Embarrassed by his partner's action, Mr. Lizardman took matters into his own hands. He asked the Counter Lady if he could kindly meet up with Mr. Goblin Slayer. Right in time, Mr. Goblin Slayer and Anna arrived at the guild. So, the party did not waste any time. They asked Mr. Slayer if they could have a private talk with him. He accepted and went to the meeting room, leaving Anna by herself. While Anna was waiting for Mr. Slayer, she was approached by young adventurers. They asked her whether she could join their party, but a witch with a humongous chest interrupted them and asked them to leave her alone. Anna and the witch then had a small talk. The witch talked about the time when Mr. Slayer asked her a favor to help in his search for a scroll, and how amazing Mr. Slayer was for doing a goblin slaying quest with no rest. Before the witch left, she gave Anna advice that if she wished to accompany him until the end, then she should make up her mind. Meanwhile, in the meeting room, Miss High Elf criticized Mr. Slayer for wearing old rookie equipment. But Old Dwarf told her that his equipment was the best equipment against the goblins because it was easier to maneuver with his equipment. Mr. Goblin Slayer was tired of the chit-chatting, so he asked them to be blunt and state their business with him. They asked him a favor and whether he could help them slay the Demon King. Of course, Mr. Slayer rejected their proposal as he has no interest other than goblin slaying quests. Knowing Mr. Slayer rejected their proposal made Miss High Elf angry because dozens of lives were at risk, yet he was still worried about the goblins. But then, the Lizard Man stated that he wouldn't be fighting the Demon Lord, but instead, he would fight the goblins that were preventing them from slaying the Demon Lord. That statement intrigued Mr. Slayer, so he asked them if they had a map of the goblins' information. After receiving the map, he immediately left to fulfill the given quest. Anna saw that Mr. Slayer was preparing for the quest, so she asked him to wait for her for a while to prepare. At night, they set up a camp and had a heartful conversation about why they decided to be an adventurer. Before Mr. Slayer can even talk, the group interrupts him because his reason is already obvious. The Lizard Man then asked Mr. Goblin Slayer for a more detailed background about goblins. Mr. Slayer stated that the goblins come from the Green Moon, a place where there is no water, grass, or trees, which made the goblins envious, so they decided to invade their world instead. At sunrise, they finally arrived at their destination. They did not waste any time. With just a single shot of the High Elf's bow, she took down 3 guards. It looks like time for another goblin hunt. As usual, Mr. Slayer extracted the goblin's blood to avoid being detected by the goblins. Miss High Elf wanted to refuse, but she had no choice but to comply. The party went inside the ruins to continue their quest. As they kept on exploring the ruins, Miss High Elf noticed that there was an alarm system inside the ruin. Mr. Slayer finds it weird because there are no totems inside the ruins, suggesting that the goblins were not led by a shaman. The old dwarf managed to deduce the goblins' hideout just by simply looking at the surroundings. Despite the information, Mr. Slayer suggests that they should go to the other route instead because he feels like something is off. He couldn't be more right, because inside the goblin's waste heap, an elf prisoner was held there. So, Anna immediately approached her in order to heal her. But the prisoner shouted the word kill, which gave her a horrible flashback from her debut quest. Mr. Slayer slowly approached the prisoner. It turns out there was a goblin behind the prisoner, and she asked him to kill it for her. After saving the prisoner, Miss High Elf promised herself that she would avenge her fellow elf. Miss High Elf's focus was dialed in. She killed every goblins on their site. When they set up a camp for a quick rest, Anna noticed that Miss High Elf looked exhausted, so she offered her a drink. But then Mr. Goblin Slayer butted in. He told Miss High Elf to stop being emotional because her emotions will just be a hinder on the quest. Because of that, she loses her composure, but everyone, especially Old Dwarf, consoles her by saying she's not alone, and everyone hates the goblins. Later on, they arrived at the goblin's nest. With the help of the old dwarf's sleeping spell and Anna's silence spell, they killed all of the goblins without alerting the rest. They accomplished their mission. They were about to head out, but then they encountered an orc, which is the goblins' leader. The orc monster was different compared to others because the monster has the ability to use a language. It was revealed that the orc was one of the demon lord's generals. The party struggled against the ogre's strength and deadly raging fire magic. They worked together in order to take the monster down, but because of its large size and regenerating ability, their efforts went to naught. Everyone was already on their wits' end. While the ogre was casting his fire spell to give the decisive blow, Mr. Goblin Slayer used his trump card, which is a magic teleportation scroll given to him by the witch that Anna met before. The ogre was caught off guard. He did not expect that Mr. Slayer was capable of doing something like that. The ogre was brutally cut in half. Before he finishes off the ogre, Mr. Goblin Slayer mocked him by saying that he struggled more against the goblins compared to him. After the quest, the elvish reinforcement arrived to take over the ruins. Mr. Goblin Slayer and the crew then headed back to the city. On their way to the city, Miss High Elf can't help but stare at Mr. Goblin Slayer because she feels like there is sadness within Mr. Goblin Slayer. So, she promised herself that one day he would take him on a proper adventure. At Mr. Slayer's village, he was doing his morning routine, which is checking the village's fence. Then Musum approaches him. She asks him whether everything is okay. As usual, he answered her question in a most goblin nerd way. Musum stated that she was worrying about his health because as soon as he got home from their previous quest, he collapsed and was asleep for days. Mr. Slayer told her that there was no time for rest because a goblin might catch them off guard. After a while, Musum and Mr. Goblin Slayer went to the town to deliver supplies at the town. While unloading the cargo, he encountered his three strange party members. Mr. Lizardman shyly asked our hero a favor. He asked him if he could give him some cheese. After giving Mr. Lizardman a cheese, the Miss High Elf informed Mr. Slayer that they were currently surveying some ruins, so they might need his help one day. She was thrilled when Mr. Slayer told her that he would think about it. Later on, inside the guild, a young adventurer asked the witch and the warlord whether they could spare him some weapon because he lost it in his last quest. They were unable to give him a weapon because his level was too low. Instead, the witch gave him a candle that he could use to find what he was looking for. Now back to Mr. Goblin Slayer. Anna informed him that she got promoted from 10th rank to 11th rank after they defeated the ogre. So, Anna thanked him for everything he did for her because without his help she would not achieve such achievement. Anna told him that she would be going back to her place to inform her mother, and she then left. On the other hand, the young adventurer was still in a pinch. He hadn't retrieved his weapon yet. So, he approaches the counter lady to help him. The counter lady stated that Mr. Goblin Slayer might be the perfect person who can help him in his situation. So, he bravely approached him along with his partner. Mr. Goblin Slayer advises him to use a club to retrieve his weapon because a club is a versatile weapon. The young adventurers took his advice and left to retrieve the young man's weapon. Thanks to the candle that the witch gave him, it served as a tracker for his lost weapon. But then they were ambushed by giant cockroaches, so they ran in panic. But after hours of playing cat and mouse games, the adventurers stood up and managed to retrieve his weapon. Meanwhile, Mr. Goblin Slayer was asked to be an observer for a promotion exam. A rookie failed the promotion exam and got demoted back to porcelain rank. The demotion made him salty, so he promised to take revenge on the counter lady and left with huge hatred towards her. After the promotion exam, the counter lady thanked Mr. Goblin Slayer for helping her. He immediately left the room to look for a goblin slaying quest. The counter lady's partner teases her by shipping her and Mr. Goblin Slayer together. But then Mr. Slayer comes back with a letter that came from a faraway place. The letter asked for Mr. Goblin Slayer's presence. We then get to see a peek at the demon lord who seems to be helping a young girl captive. But then a heroine showed up and prevented the demon lord from going any further. That story spread at the guild, but no one was sure whether it was a fact or a rumor. Mr. Goblin Slayer then approached the party and told them that it was time for another goblin slaying quest. Of course, the party was willing to go with Mr. Slayer. The quest location was in the Water Town. The next day, Mr. Goblin Slayer and the rest of the party arrived at Water Town. At the Water Town, they went to the Temple of Law, where they would meet up with their client. Mr. Slayer stated that their client was the Sword Maiden, an archbishop of the supreme god, which hyped up Anna. Inside the temple, the Sword Maiden greeted them wholeheartedly. She then informed them about the acolyte girl they sent for an errand who unfortunately got murdered, and they suspected that the culprit must be a goblin. Just by simply hearing the Sword Maiden's story, the party was able to deduce the goblin's hideout, and it was at the sewers. It turns out that the Sword Maiden already has the idea that the goblins might be in the sewers, so she asked the military to help them before, but due to the army's incompetence and refusal to accept rookie quests such as goblin slaying quests, she was left with no choice but to reach out for Mr. Goblin Slayer's help instead, to which of course Mr. Slayer and the crew accepted her quest. Their plan was to go to the sewers, so they asked Miss Sword Maiden the most efficient way how to get on the sewers. After Miss Sword Maiden gave all the information they needed to know, they headed out. While everyone was leaving, the maiden asked Anna if she was not feeling frightened. She replied though she was scared, she knew everything was going to be alright. Their deduction was right, the goblin used the sewers as their headquarters. After killing some goblins, they were caught off guard when another group of goblins did a rain of arrows. Luckily Anna reacted just in time and used her barrier skill, making them unscathed from the attack. The moment the barrier shattered, Mr. Slayer threw a pepper bomb, which made the goblins unable to retaliate from their attacks. They were making a huge commotion as they mercilessly slay each goblins. Because of that commotion, the party attracts the attention of a giant alligator and ambushes them. So, they quickly ran away from the vicious monster, but escaping from its attack was not an easy feat. While running away from the alligator, Miss High Elf senses that another horde of goblins is coming, but Mr. Goblin Slayer remained calm because he had a plan. It turns out that his plan was to use the goblins as bait for the alligator. Thanks to that brilliant plan, they managed to escape. When they arrived at the surface, the party was bothered by how the goblins were able to ride a boat. It seems that the goblins are getting more intelligent lately. Regardless, Mr. Goblin Slayer's goal was still the same, and that was to kill all goblins until there were no single goblins left. That's it for this anime recap. This anime hit hard indeed. It gives us the feeling of despair, hope, and commitment. It also reminded us to always chase our goal no matter how hard the hurdles are. So, what do you think? Is it really possible for Mr. Goblin Slayer to achieve his goal? And what do you think is the reason why the goblins were getting smarter? Tune in for the next episode to find out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button to be updated for future uploads. Take care, as always.